Today's talk is about frameworkless web development in Clojure. I will give you a little whirlwind tour through all the Clojure libraries which are normally used to accomplish this task. I will start with something about HTTP abstraction, a library for routing, two libraries for HTML templating, which I have both used and very like, and something about authentication. So what do I like when I do web programming in Clojure? I like that there's no dominant web framework. So it's not like when you do Ruby, you have to use Sinatra or Rails. It was a couple of years ago. There's no real hype yet. There are also no framework-dependent paradigms, like, for example, in the JavaScript world, where you have all these Angular JSs and Ember JSs and .JSs and whatever JSs, where every single framework and library brings its own paradigms. You don't have that. You normally have just plain old Clojure data structures, like I think which Hickey said, leave data alone. That's exactly what we do when we do web development in Clojure. We just pass around vectors and maps which have a proper format, for example, to represent an HTTP request. With this, we have the full power of Clojure available everywhere in any step. It's just plain old data. We can use filter, map, reduce, whatever we like. And it's a bit like web programming from the bottom up. You start with the little parts and put them together, and then you get a comprehensive web application. So, what do we normally need when we do web programming? We need some kind of web server HTTP abstraction to put our web application on any server, like, for example, in Clojure, like Jetty and the HTTP kit, for example. So we want to have an abstraction above that. We want to have middlewares, for example, for session handling, CSRF protection, and many more things. We want to have some kind of request routing. So request comes in, which part of our application has to handle that. We want, when we do web application, we sometimes want some kind of HTML templating or JSON templating or XML templating if you're into that kind of stuff. We want some kind of authentication and database abstraction and communication with the front end. I put in braces because I'm not covering these, but we also want some kind of database abstraction and some kind of some way to communicate with our front end, like, for example, to render JSON and put it into front end, or which is preferable in Clojure is to use Eden, which is just JSON in better. Okay, what libraries do we use? For HTTP abstraction and middlewares, we have Ring, which I will cover in much more detail later. For routing, we have Cloud and Composure. So Cloud is just the HTTP request routing library, matching library, and Composure puts that and uses it in to do comprehensive routing. HTML templating, we have Hiccup, which is quite easy. I think we saw that today somewhere, I don't know. It's just Clojure vectors, and you put HTML tags as keywords in them, and it just renders to HTML. And nlive, which is another approach. And for authentication, we have Friend, which just sounds nice. So what is Ring? Ring is the most widely used Clojure interface between web servers and web applications. I don't know, is there any alternative to Ring? Did anyone do a web application in Clojure without Ring? CLJ HTTP, I heard? Okay. So no one. So Ring is the de facto standard. Similar technologies exist in other languages like Plug and Ruck and Cluck and WSGI, which somehow got it wrong, obviously. So how does Ring work? That's why it's called Ring. I read that on the wiki from James Reeves said, oh, I put it on a nice graphic where a request comes in and it gets handled and it gets back, so it looks like a ring, so I'm calling it Ring. So where do we start? We start here at the top, and the client issues an HTTP request. This one goes to the server and then through an adapter and is converted to a ring request, which is it's just a map which we work with in our application. Then we pass it through some middlewares which might do authentication, session handling and stuff. Then we still have a ring request. It gets to our handler function. Handler is a synonym for it's our application, the thing that does things. And it's converted into a response, goes through another bunch of middlewares, then stays a response, goes through the adapter again, and then goes back through the HTTP server to the client. So what concepts do we have? We have requests, we have responses, we have middlewares, handlers, and adapters. And I want to cover them all. So first, a little ring example. So how might you want to set up your example ring project? It's quite easy. Use these dependencies here, for example, the ring core dependency, and line ring to start your ring application later. For line ring, you have to specify handler function, which in my case is in the namespace ringexample.core/handler. That's a function name. This is a ring example core namespace. There we have our handler function, which takes a request and issues a response. And the ring response is just, that. It's just a map with a status code, in this case 200, some headers, so a map of headers, and a body, in this case hello world. And you can start this application with the line ring server, and wherever you go, you will get this response. So, how do requests and responses look like? There's an excellent library, it's called ringmock, where we can just create these request and response maps easily. Here's an example of a request map. It's just which server, which port, where do I come from, which URI do I want to visit, what are my parameters, which schema I'm using, and so on. I think you get the idea. And that's everything we handle. That's the basis of all web development in Clojure. It's just converting one map to the other. I talked about middlewares. Middlewares are like handler functions. They just don't give a response map, but they they enhance a handler function. Like, for example, this wrap content type function here. If you always wanted to return, for example, the text HTML content type, you can just wrap your handler in this function. It takes a handler and a content type and returns another function, which is also a handler function because it takes a request. So what it does internally, it calls the handler with the request, gets the result, which it puts here in this response variable, and then associates into that map another content type, which you can define here. With adapters, it gets a bit more complex because we have to know the underlying web server. This is exactly from directly from the ring code for a ring Jetty adapter. If you're interested in that, just have a look at it. It's, I think, 150 lines. It's quite short and good read, quite a good read. So we have this proxy handler function here, and what it basically does is it takes a request map and builds it from the Java servlet request, and then it calls the handler function, which is our application, creates a response map from that, and when we have a response map, it updates the servlet response and sets handled to true. And that's it. That's the gist of handling HTTP requests with Jetty and Clojure. Any questions so far? Okay. So we'll go to the next library, which is Cloud. This one does HTTP matching. And it's also very short. Give it a read. It's, I think, 103 lines of code, which does all that. So you can. So here in this code example, we import the cloud namespace. We import ringmork request to create our requests more easily, and just ask Cloud if some root matches. For example, in this case, article and title and author and name and title in this case are just variable parts which get matched later. Then we put in a request with article about Clojure and author is Rich, and what we get back is a map. So it matched. We get a map containing the title and the name, and then we can process that for later. This is another example of a root that doesn't match. So in the case we ask for schnuff schnuff, we get nil. It just doesn't match. Composure uses this internally and puts some nice macro magic around it, so we can use it much more easily. It provides these get and post macros. It provides a def roots macro, which takes all the underlying root macros and combines them together into one function, in this case app, which is just a ring handler. And so the request comes in, goes into our app function, and then goes through all this cloud matching here. And when it matches, it calls the code in, for example here, found article with title, or it creates some, this should be a redirect after post, actually, but doesn't matter. So Composure just combines all of this and provides a comprehensive routing framework. If you want to create HTML, we got Hiccup, which is, I think, the easiest way to do this. You just write vectors of vectors of vectors and just construct your tree, your HTML tree. Like in this case, so we use hiccup.page. It provides a function called HTML5, which sets the doc type and the HTML tags around it. And we put in a head with the title, how much do I love Clojure, and body, oh yes, very much. And it's a very big very much. And this is what we get out if we put it into the HTML function. If you don't want to type that much, so you can add a map in this case with all the special attributes for your title tag, like, I don't know, for example, any data attributes you might have. You can add here as a map. Or for the standard attributes like ID and class, you can use this CSS Zen coding-like syntax. We can just chain the different classes with the dot together at the end and have the ID with a hash sign in front. This, for example, shows us the div class and then the two classes, the ID and what I put into the div. And another, so you can just use this in a, for example, in a Composure root and just emit HTML in a ring response and just put content type text HTML, put the HTML function in, and you don't have, you can, for example, do the rendering just in the final step in the Composure root. Another interesting approach is nlive, which I'm actually switching to with my web application because most of the web designers out there don't like writing hiccup for some reason. I can't understand it, why it is that way. But what I want to achieve is just give them HTML and take HTML back from them and say, okay, and this div here is something special. So if you have a div ID, article list, then please put it somewhere on your page design, and then this will happen. We can use nlive for that. So suppose you have the following HTML template without any placeholders. That's the important part. There's not any curly braces % for templating language in them. So it's just plain HTML. So you can have, for example, example expansions in there. If you say I have a list of articles, so you can put an actual list of articles in there. Let the designer do his CSS magic and his HTML fiddling, and then in your code you can just transform that. nlive has two concepts. The one is a selector and the other one is a transformer. The former part here is the selector, where we, for example, select the head, and in the head the title, or the body, and in the body the unordered list here. And the next one is a transformer. There are some function which take the result of a selection here and emit something like a string or HTML. Content is one of these transformers which just takes the content of the HTML tag and replaces it with a string you give it here. For example, in this case, nlive starter kit and the parameter foo coming in from the front here. Or you can just chain some transformers together with this do arrow macro function. In this case, we add a class called item list and we append items into it. So when we call this returns a function which we can call with one parameter, and it just takes this HTML template and transforms it into another one, which we can then serve to our customer. Okay, next part is authentication. I've only used friend. There are some other libraries. One is Buddy, I think, and you can have a look at it on the Clojure toolbox. There are some different libraries. I fared very well with friend. So, it works very well with Ring and Composure, and it provides role-based authentication. So if you have user roles and admin roles and local admin roles and whatever, you can provide that with friend. It uses one thing it uses is a credential function, which is just used for matching the usernames and passwords, for example, against your database. And the other is an authentication workflow, which might be, for example, OAuth or HTTP basic auth or login forms. Workflow just means that when the request comes in and it is unauthenticated, it goes through this workflow, like it displays a login form and then redirects. Here's an example of a credential function. We have a map in the first case, like username is Joe and app.foo, which is just our application name / passphrase, is some kind of bcrypt hash. This is directly from the friend source code. I've rolled out my own function for PBF, I don't know. I hope you know what I mean. PBFDK2. Exactly. So this is how you can validate a bcrypt hash password. You have this load credentials function, which might, for example, access your database and select the username and password record. Then it just loads the credentials here and uses a password key. Selects it from the metadata, and then uses bcrypt verify to verify the password. You can also just return true if you are into that kind of stuff. You can do basically whatever you want for authentication. Here's an example of a workflow that's quite a large piece of code, I would say. And I also shortened it, so this extract username password ... is from me, and there should be another ... No, there isn't. So basically what it does. A workflow a workflow function returns some kind of authentication record, it's called. This is what makeAuth does here at the bottom. So it gets some kind of user record and then adds some stuff. If the ring friend authenticated method middleware, which you wrap around your application, finds some kind of authentication record, the user is authenticated. If not, then he gets rejected. So that's basically what this code does. It uses a credential function, then gets the auth config from the request, and then creates a new one. And if no user record exists, comes from up here. I think you get the example. So how do you put all this together? Easiest way is, in this case, use a dummy in-memory database where we have two users, root and Jane. Both have passwords, both have roles in this sets here. We have some kind of ring application, which is not specified in this case, and we want to secure this. So we can use, we can dev some secured app here, use our ring application, and then wrap the authentication workflow mechanism as a middleware around that. And we can pass in the credential function and the workflows it's going to use. And it starts with the first one and then the next one. It tries all workflows. Like you can say, okay, normally I want to have HTTP basic auth. If that doesn't work, I want to have a login form, or in any order. Okay, that's basically it. I hope I'm not too short in this case. No. So what's great about this frameworkless approach? We have, as you have seen, we have many small libraries which serve just one purpose and only one. They communicate very well with each other because we just use plain old Clojure data structures. Systems become easier. You don't have to pull a whole framework into it, where you might just use half of the features. So you can just pick and choose the libraries you really need. For example, if you just want to build a web service which just serves, for example, one page or one static or some static information, you can just include ring and nothing else, because you can just give it your handler function and then return the data. You don't need to put in pull in any large framework into your code base. Here's some information. That's where the code examples came from. So have a look at Ring. It's built very nicely. Have a look at Cloud. Composure is a bit more difficult. And the last ones I haven't looked at. So I've never looked into nlive code. Any questions? Yes? Yes? Thank you.
Works. What were the questions? Is one?
Is
this thing working? Yes, it is.
Yes?
There are lots of libraries, and what I found sometimes difficult is like how to put them together. And have you played with Trapper Keeper or like with Stuart Sierra's component library?
I've played with the component library.
Or the question is like, do you recommend one way on how to structure these apps, because you have so many libraries now?
The last part again, please. I didn't get that.
Do you recommend a way on structuring Clojure web apps?
I personally like component to put structure into your web apps. This dependency injection approach works very nicely. You should do it from the start. So there was I think 1 weekend a couple of months ago where I decided, oh, I want to use a component in my web application now. I learned about that, I want to do that. And yeah, it took me 2 whole days to identify each function and put the required dependencies in it. So if you want to use component, tip of mine, just start with it. Don't put it in afterwards, because it's much work. I have one commit this large where I almost touch every function in my code, and that's very much. There's also a, from James Reeves, there's also a very good example on how to include component into your Clojure web app. I heard about that, yes. I think it's stuck. Ah, great. Should have a look at it. Yes, please.
One of the benefits of frameworks is that they can provide security by default. Like for one example, cross-site scripting to have CSRF tokens in your forms and have them verified. This has been a bit of a problem so far. I've read a bit about it in Clojure. What do you think about that? Is that improving with the libraries now? Or?
I think it is improving. There's actually quite a large effort to make Clojure web development more secure, but you're completely right. If you have a framework which already does all that for you, it's much easier. You still have to put work into it, and you still have to include all the appropriate middlewares, mostly yourself. But I think there's an effort to just build some kind of Clojure web app security library which you can pull in and say, okay, make it secure, please.
One question regarding best practices for testing and integration testing of code. What's your favorite libraries there?
Testing libraries. I like Clojure Test. I loathe CLJ WebDriver, but I use it because I didn't find anything else. It just broke when I updated it, so it wasn't very nice to me. I started using a bit of Carodon for integration testing, as the ThoughtWorks guy before me said. Hugo Fiert, exactly. He told you about Carodon, which is a very nice library to do integration testing, and most of it is just using unit tests with core test, in my case. Because this is introduction to web development in Clojure and not how to write RESTful web services in Clojure. The author is back there. Hi. But yes, you can also use Liberator.
One question from a Clojure newbie. So is there any good template or getting started
Yes.
with Clojure? Because if I have these libraries, I have to put them together myself, and then I need another one and another one.
Yes, there is. Do I still have some time to do a small, tiny, weeny demo? So let's go to the temp folder. What you can do is use the Composure template initially. So, no, line Composure here. So just this sets up a new Ring application, Ring and Composure application with the Composure template. And now we wait for Clojure to load itself. Great. So we got this Ring example here. And in the source folder, we get this as our first example. So what it already pulls in for you is Ring and Composure and the appropriate middlewares. We can have a look at the project CLJ, where you just see, okay, it puts in Composure and the Ring defaults library, and also adds some development dependencies for you and sets up the Ring handler. HTML templating you still have to pull in yourself, because I would recommend starting with Hiccup, because it's just easy. And we can just run this application and do a line ring server. And then wait for Clojure to load. Oh, nö. I've never worked with Luminous, so no idea. I heard about it, but okay, so that's a basic web application. We have this hello world here. We can use some other route like /error, where we get a not found error. And that's a very good starting template. It also pulls in this site defaults function, which already includes many middlewares for you. So let's see, let me start another line REPL so we can have a look at what site defaults actually does. Please decrease Clojure startup times. Okay, Load the namespace. So this is what site defaults actually puts in for you. Okay, it looks a bit different, but all these are ring middlewares which get pulled in. For example, for URL encoded data, multipart data, nested query parameters, keyword parameters. You have the cookies. You have for session management. You have a flash storage. Cookie attributes. It already puts in cross-site scripting protection, which is enabled and just blocks it. It puts in the ring anti-forgery module for CSRF protection. So it's quite a bit better than when I started. There was a site defaults. There was a site function back then, but it didn't pull all this security stuff in.
I just wanted to mention that because it might be useful for people getting started with Clojure web development, that there's something called Luminous. It's basically a frameworkless framework for Clojure. It's basically the collection of all the stuff that you mentioned today. And it helps you easily get started. It's basically just documentation and lining and template, but I think it can be useful if you're getting started.
And you are the maintainer. No, not. It wasn't advertising. Any more questions? This is not the case. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We continue. Yeah.